I would vote for Trump if I were
Would you really?
An American. Yes, I would.
A convicted felon.
Well, I think the Trump...
Someone with your...
Do you accept that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, yes or no?
I accept that in a rigged court of Manhattan, they were able to get a judgment against him. I would say this: I would rather have a convicted felon than Kamala Harris be president.
It's really kind of sad or depressing, whatever the word is you want to use, that Donald Trump has so many of these good Americans bamboozled. So they just don't believe what they see. They don't believe what they hear. They only believe what Donald Trump tells them and no one else.
This week on Jacob Rees-Mogg's GB News channel, Matthew Stadlen did a fantastic job in getting Jacob to expose himself, literally, with his concession that he would vote for Trump if he was in America. And it is astonishing that this hasn't been picked up across the media, but then I suppose it's not, because the media are more invested in trying to find anything to attack the Labour government on, even if it's absolutely trivial. But in truth, it is shocking that Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was a minister in government until fairly recently with huge responsibilities, is prepared to admit that he backs Trump. And it's now largely accepted by most people that Trump is a Vladimir Putin puppet. And Vladimir Putin is threatening Europe. He is on our continent waging war in Ukraine. And the majority of British people are really not Putin fans. And the majority of British people are not fans of Trump either. So it is extraordinary that Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks he's going to get support by showing his true colours. But equally, I suppose he's enticed to do this because Nigel Farage, who's also the star on GB News, is so outwardly a Trump supporter that it confounds belief that people can support Nigel Farage when actually he is supporting Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, who wants to actually dominate Europe and destroy democracy. And the one person who confirmed this week is also a Conservative and a former Conservative minister, Grant Shapps.
Really super alarming to people. There was a conference of 9 countries who, many of whom have very dubious or no democracy at all, getting together just last week with the country that is actually actively at war in Europe today, in the biggest war since the Second World War on the European continent. So, wake up, world. What more we need to demonstrate what I was saying during that Lancaster House speech in January, when I used that phrase? We seem to have moved from a post-war to a pre-war era. These are people who want to change the way that the world operates. And it doesn't mean democracy. It doesn't mean freedom. It doesn't mean liberal markets or the ability to have programs like Times Radio saying whatever you want, because the state will be controlling those things if we lived under a Putin or a Chinese or a North Korean or an Iranian system. I would have thought that's all pretty obvious, and I'm alarmed that people are quite so relaxed about it.
But you seem to be saying, sorry, Grant Shapps, final question. You seem to be saying that is now a possibility. And I'm sure if we'd done this interview, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, before the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we wouldn't be having a conversation of this magnitude.
I think that's exactly right. And not just Ukraine, also what's happened in the Middle East. And regardless of what you think about the rights and wrongs of the Israeli response and this, that, and the other, the reality that you've got Iran essentially stirring up in Lebanon through Hezbollah, in Gaza through Hamas, in Yemen through the Houthis, and this combination with Russia in support of them, means that we are living in a very different geopolitical world. And so I think you're right, certainly before February 2022, when Putin went in, before the conflict in the Middle East, things looked more stable, and this is a risky moment. And it's not too late, but it does require some bravery from the West. And I go back to things like those storm shadows. We just have to make sure Ukraine wins that war. Otherwise, we leave ourselves in a position where any other wannabe autocrat looks at it and, what is the disincentive from going and blockading Taiwan, for example? If you think in reality, the West may say, don't do it. The reality is that you can go and do it and you can get away from it.
It is clear that a Trump presidency is going to cause havoc in the world, but specifically for us in Europe, we face the reality he will withdraw from NATO, emboldening Vladimir Putin to continue his aggression across Europe.
A Trump presidency is quite likely. We need to get on with him. One of the opportunities of leaving the European Union is we get a trade deal with the States. Democrats didn't want to do that, but Trump might be. And this is made less likely if we upset Trump. And it's as if Labour hasn't quite realised that they won.
Yeah, I think I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, as you might expect, and I hope you're not either. I suspect that Keir Starmer is not a fan of Donald Trump's. However, he has met Trump. He has broken bread with Trump and says that it was a successful meeting about the special relationship. He hasn't actually met, as far as I understand it, Kamala Harris. So he's been doing really important work on behalf of his government and on behalf of us, on behalf of Britain, to build bridges with a man that clearly he doesn't identify with. And I think this is partly because Starmer, for all your criticisms of him, and you call him sort of Reverend Starmer, I just don't, that's not how I see him. But I don't think he's an ideologue. Now, that might be a problem, it might not be. I think he's a pragmatist.
All right, but if he's a pragmatist, he must look at Donald Trump and know that Donald Trump is quite sensitive. He doesn't respond well to criticism, and he can be quite tough on people who've been difficult towards him.
Well, how many people survive working with him? I mean, he fires most of them.
That's right, he fires lots of people. Yeah. And therefore, this makes it even less sensible to have allowed 100 people to go and campaign. And you're right, he may not have given them formal permission, but either there's no one properly in control of the Labour Party, or they thought it wasn't going to do any harm.
You could argue, Jacob, that the more we talk about it, and I'm all for talking about it because this is a free society and our government needs to be held to democratic scrutiny, not just in the House of Commons, but by us in the media. But arguably, the more we talk about it, the more we make a thing about it, the more likely Donald Trump will remember it. But I want you to remember something, and I want viewers to remember something, that for all my very, very strong issues with Donald Trump, and the vast majority of people in this country have a big problem with him and what he stands for and some of the things that he's actually done himself, he is a huge fan of the special relationship. I mean, a big fan.
But you see,
I think it would take more. What I'm trying to say is, I think it would take more than this to shake that.
But that's one of the reasons you don't want to offend him, because his starting position is positive. And I would vote for Trump if I were an American. Yes, I would.
A convicted felon.
I think the
Trump. I mean, you mock our friend Starmer, our Prime Minister.
Yeah, because I think the charge.
You are a religious man.
But
and to back someone who is not just a convicted felon on many counts, but also someone who has been found in a civil court, so not found guilty, liable for sexual assault. I wouldn't have thought you would hold hands with that.
Prosecutor and Democrat judge.
Well, hang on. Are you saying that the rule of law doesn't work in America?
Yes,
because that's a very serious allegation about our partner, about our closest ally.
I think the rule of law in America has been deeply politicised and used in New York by a Democrat judge, a Democrat donor.
So there isn't a rule of law in America?
In this country, a judge who donated to a political party would be unheard of, whereas that judge was a Democrat donor. But to come back, I want to touch on Tony Blair, a point I mentioned briefly in the monologue. Actually, Tony Blair whispered this quietly, got the special relationship absolutely right. He understood that it was the job of the British Prime Minister to get on with whoever the American people had elected. Nobody thought that ideologically he was close to George Bush Jr., but he worked incredibly well with him and made the special relationship a success. Starmer, by allowing 100 people to go,
if he knew,
but if he didn't know, he was incompetent. By allowing that, he has shown himself not to be as adept as Tony Blair.
Well, I think Tony Blair is a hugely skillful politician. But let's remember that although it is very thin, the majority that that Starmer helped secure for Labour. It is a very, very strong majority.
Yeah,
and he was the leader of that party. If you think back to when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, and I couldn't vote for the Labour Party when Corbyn was leader, and you think how far Starmer has taken that party to the position, not just of power, but to a landslide. He's got to be getting something right. Can I just make a very quick point? Because I'm not somebody who wants to get involved in whataboutery, but we have literally just now had sitting in this studio, indeed in your chair, the leader of Reform, which is a party that hopes one day to form a government. And Nigel Farage, if anyone is open to all of us, looks at his declaration of interests. He was paid for his accommodation for the Republican convention to the tune of £32,000. And his description of it was to go and support his friend Donald Trump, who just survived, thank God, an assassination attempt. Let me just quickly finish. And to represent the people of Clacton, Jacob, let's say this with a straight face, on the world stage. And he's laying into Labour on this.
Clacton deserves to be on the world stage.
It does indeed,
and
but
Nigel,
I mean, not to the tune of £32,000.
But Nigel isn't in government. That's the point.
He hopes to lead government, though, doesn't he?
It's unwise when you're in government. It's just different in opposition. Matthew Stadlen, I'll get it right this time. I called you Stadlen.
I've got my MCC tie on in honour of your love of cricket and our upcoming victory in Pakistan.
Well, the viewers, it's only fair to let them know that Matthew and I get on an awful lot of things, even if we disagree about the qualities of...
And other episodes about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. And these are things that you should really know. I'm Philip Ingram. I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer. I have planned NATO operations like the one that we saw the Russians try and execute into Ukraine 2.5 years ago. And I'm now a global commentator on all matters defence and security. So Ukraine is firmly in my remit, and you will have seen me on Frontline. So our first question is from Steve. And Steve says, I've been wondering about how the training of Ukrainian soldiers has been progressing. This is a big issue, getting enough troops, trained troops to go to the front line. The Russians aren't doing it. The British have set up an operation called Operation Interflex, but it's not the UK alone that is training Ukrainian forces in the UK. We've got a total of 14 nations, including Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, Germany, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, and interestingly, Kosovo are all helping in the training of Ukrainian civilians and turning them into trained soldiers. The course runs about 3 months. So far, since 2022, about 45,000 Ukrainian civilians have been turned into soldiers before they've been sent to the front line. But this is nothing new. Before that was Operation Orbital. We're over the line in any way, shape or form. So our next question is from Greg, and he says since at least 2008, and I agree, at least, Putin believes the West is weak, and today we see the USA in almost complete chaos. Well, I think it's slightly more than just the USA in almost complete chaos. That's a very interesting question. I think if we look at what triggered Vladimir Putin to go into Ukraine when he did 2.5 years ago, in February 2022, I think it was the debacle that was the NATO's response and the international response into Afghanistan, and the debacle of our withdrawal from Afghanistan. You know, we have a number of uncoordinated, poorly trained individuals in the Taliban have managed to effectively, in the information sphere, push highly trained, highly capable, the best equipped in the world NATO forces out of Afghanistan. Now, it's much more complicated than that, but that's where I think Vladimir Putin will have thought that the West will have been licking its wounds from a very embarrassing withdrawal. And also, from a political perspective, we have had the hiatus, as you talk about so well, in the United States, with the politics that's going on in there. We've also got the hiatus across Europe with Brexit and the difficulties that there are in the post-Brexit EU and as relationships start to develop there. And I think Vladimir Putin saw that as an opportunity to further his political, military and strategic aims. And he didn't expect that there would be a coordinated response from the West. That's why he made his decision when he did, I believe. It'll be interesting when if we ever get the chance to look at any records of his decision-making. Casualties. So our next question is from Dave, and Dave asks, why is it all former Warsaw Pact nations are the most ready to build up arms and prevent Russian invasion? There's two simple answers to that, Dave. And it is a really important question, because we see former Warsaw Pact countries starting to spend 3, 4, 5, 6% of GDP and buying thousands of tanks and other pieces of military equipment. It's two reasons. One, they tend to be the ones that are butted up against Russia. So if Ukraine falls, or Ukraine is forced into a peace agreement, they're the ones that Vladimir Putin is likely to attack next. And it's not, he might, it's not anything else. He will plan to attack someone else at some stage in the future. The second thing is, they know what the Russians are like. They have worked as part of the Soviet Union. They're political decision makers, they're military decision makers. They understand the mentality that's going on. And putting that understanding of the mentality, understanding they're also on the front line and potentially next, they know what Putin will do. And therefore, they're making the right decisions. It's too easy for us further back in the West to go, oh, there's a buffer zone, or it's not going to happen to us immediately. I think we should be listening to their experience and taking that experience on board and starting to mirror what they are doing.
Over the next couple of weeks, we will finally learn what punishment Rachel Reeves has in store for us in the budget, and we will learn which candidate will become the American president. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Do comment below, let me know what you think. If you haven't subscribed, please do consider subscribing, and you can also hit the notification button and you'll be notified each time I post a video.